let me officially start the meeting. I want to start by welcoming everybody. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Paul Lachelier. I'm the founder and the director of Learning Life. It's a Washington, D.C. based nonprofit that runs this meeting of Citizen Diplomacy International, and I'll be moderating this meeting. I'd like you, and I'm going to put this in the Zoom chat, to please introduce yourself. Including your name, your city, your country, your email, and LinkedIn profile for our records. You can share that privately to me if you prefer, but feel free to just cut and paste a one paragraph bio about you or a web link with more information about you and your work. So let me put that in the Zoom chat. And and so a little bit of information about Citizen Diplomacy International for those of you who are unfamiliar. We've started Citizen Diplomacy International, I believe, in 2021. Before this, it was part of what was called the Public Diplomacy Council. Well, it's now called the PDCA, Public Diplomacy Council of America, but CDI is now part of Learning Life. And CDI holds quarterly meetings throughout the year to encourage people essentially to learn about citizen diplomacy and to advance the field of citizen diplomacy. We also issue a bulletin. Which presents research and also news and activities going on in citizen diplomacy. We'll be presenting that at the tail end of this meeting. Maria, who I believe is with us, yes, will be presenting that at the tail end of our meeting. And we have and I'm going to share I'm going to share to the Zoom chat some details about Citizen Diplomacy International, as well as some ways in which you can connect with us. If you would like to get email notifications, I will note the bulletin here. This is how you can get notifications of our meetings. And you can also connect with us on Facebook and LinkedIn to learn about prior meetings and to connect with others who are interested in citizen diplomacy. And if you'd like recordings of our CDI prior meetings, you can find them on YouTube. And and so I'm sharing that to our screen to the Zoom chat, as well as the broader community that we have, which is called the Democracy and Diplomacy Community, which you are welcome to join if you're interested. Okay, hold on a second. I have to admit a few people. Um, and so we are going to, a couple of other things to note to you. As you can see here, this meeting is recorded, and we will be taking screenshots as well. And we will be sharing that out, the photos, the video, the agenda, the Zoom chat. So whatever you say in the Zoom chat, we will be sharing out to a larger group. Um, Given this is citizen diplomacy with an accent on the citizen, your active participation is really important. So, in preparation for the discussion after the speakers, please write your questions or comments about the presentations in the Zoom chat. We'll get to your Zoom chat questions and comments when the presentations are completed. We'll have about 40 minutes of discussion. We have one of our interns, Pedro, who is taking attendance. So they'll appreciate you indicating your name, your city, your country, your email for our records so that we can keep you posted. Um, One other thing I need to do before I introduce the speakers, which is to take a screenshot of everybody. So if you could turn on your cameras, for those of you who have your cameras off, for those of you who are willing to turn on your cameras, and I will take a screenshot in on three. So, okay. On three, one, two, three, smile. Fantastic. Thank you very much. Okay, so I want to very briefly introduce our speakers, and then we will proceed from one to the other. They have each 10 minutes to speak. I will keep time. We have Layla Nicholas, who's joining us from Lebanon. She's a professor of international relations and international law at Lebanese University, and as I understand it, at the Lebanese army as well. Is that right, Layla? Okay,
Yes.
good. Um, and we have Segun Oshiwolo, who is Associate Professor of International Relations at Federal University Lokoja in Nigeria and Deputy Director of the Institute of Governance and Development Studies. And lastly, we have Eric Huxthausen, a climate change and policy and strategy expert, most recently Senior Advisor for Climate Partnerships and Innovation and Chief Sustainability Officer with the U.S. Trade and Development Agency. So without further ado, I'm going to have Layla present first, if you want to share your slides.
Thank you. I will. Okay. Okay.
Perfect.
I will skip some slides during this intervention because I thought that we have 20 minutes and it's just 10 minutes. Just a note before I start that I'm from Lebanon. I'm not an environmental expert. That just that you know, I am an expert in security and conflict, transitional justice, and rule of law. But what makes me introduce this topic about environmental diplomacy because I realized that environment is going to be the main cause or one of the main causes of the conflicts in the future. So a roadmap for this presentation: why environmental diplomacy, where are we now, and how to move forward. So as I said, if we want to categorize environmental security, we have two dimensions: the environmental security, which is the threats to human beings, and ecological security, which is threats to environmental itself, to the environment itself. So if we want to go to further in the narratives for environmental conflicts, we have resources scarcity, we have demographics, so we have youth bulge, one of the main causes of the Arab Spring, inequalities, human migration, refugees going here and there, globalization, and unequal resource distribution. Not just we have scarcity of resources, but also we have unfair resource distribution, either through inside the state or between the states. If we want to give an empirical examples of the how can the environment affect security and conflicts, we give Syria civil war. One of the reasons of the Syrian civil war. I know that we have democratic deficit and everything you can know, but something that you don't know, that an extreme drought between 2006 and 2009 happened in Syria, and it was one of the causes that have led to the civil war and the eruption of the uprising. Also, we have in Lebanon, in some intervals of time, we have the refugees coming from Syria. They have hostilities with the communities, especially because of the resource scarcity and poverty. We are talking about the poor areas where the immigration or the refugees come and settle between the so poor people host poor people. So that's why I see that environmental diplomacy must be a proactive and preventive peace building tool. So I will skip also we have many types of diplomacy. We have the traditional state-to-state diplomacy. We have the multilateral diplomacy, and we have also the role of NGOs, which is in the informal diplomacy. And I will talk about the NGOs later on. So where we are now, so we have in the legal processes, we have 4 generations in the advancement of international environmental law. The first generation was before 1945. We have bilateral treaties. We have some norms which were established, especially though no transboundary harm. We have the second generation, which is from 1972 till 1992, from Stockholm Conference to Rio Summit. And we have the third generation from 1992 to 2015. The most important thing that our summit that happened during this generation was the Kyoto. And we have the generation 4, which is post 215 till now. So if we want to categorize also the treaties, we have two types of treaties: conventions regulating natural resources and conventions regulating pollution. So I will skip these. Oh, this is I put the Kyoto Protocol, but it's the first binding treaty for the environment. So the implementation gap from despite the Kyoto Protocol, unfortunately, the global emissions has significantly increased. As you see, the baseline from after Kyoto, 32% increase. And the UN said in September 2025 that we are still off target. On the bright side, we have we still have many progresses have happened through generations. Some of the principles which are now as customary international law also: a sovereign shall make no harm, the duty to prevent, the principle of cooperation, the principle of sustainable development, the precautionary principle, the polluter pays, which no one abides by it, and the principle of common but differentiated responsibility. So the challenges, we have many challenges. Why there is no implementation? We have the North-South divide on the global level. The global North states can focus on environment because they are wealthy, but the global South focuses on poverty, justice, and development, and they have different priorities between the North and the South. And sometimes the North abuses the pollution on the cost of the South. Also, on the multinational level, we have weak negotiators when states are negotiating treaties. So sometimes there are divisions at home. That's why some people who are negotiating environmental treaties cannot force some of the amendments. We have the coalition buildings also especially between the states and multinational corporations, and they are making propaganda, and they are making many bargains also to lessen the amendments of the treaties. We have this NGO diplomacy. I will talk here about the AstroTurf. Some of the NGOs they are funded by the states or by the corporations, and they implement their agendas. And sometimes fake NGOs are created by commercial interests. They appear as NGOs and as independent, but they are likely promoting the agenda of these corporations. On the state level, we have the state national interests, and we understand that. We understand also that we have this dichotomy between economy, sustainability, and environment. We have economic growth sometimes leads to not abiding. The states does not abide by the environmental treaties. We have also now, since 2016 till now, and now we have the populism. Some groups are talking about the environment or like the climate change as a hoax. I think you know that. Also, we have governance challenges. Sometimes states have to allocate funds for health, for other issues rather than the environment. Unseen threats, the time lag between the human action and the environmental effect. this time lag makes influencing public opinion very difficult, and the implementation sometimes states often fail to enforce treaties domestically due to economic trade-offs. How to move forward? I think that if we want to have a vision for a better world, we should have a new era of statecraft, especially in regard to the environment. These are my recommendations. I think that we should train expert diplomats. The diplomacy now is facing many challenges that require new practices. The diplomatic field should realize that either to develop or perish. Today, it's essential to move to more professionalism, to have expert diplomats, not just on the environmental field, but also on many other fields. Expert diplomats, I define them as professionals with advanced scientific training and authorized to make politically or legally binding decisions. I urge to have interdisciplinary training. This training should provide the diplomats and the experts with extensive knowledge and position, reinforce their expertise in scientific fields. I suggest this training also should go both ways, providing scientific knowledge to political negotiators and diplomats, and provide political knowledge to scientific experts. So it should go both ways. I also have recommendations that we should construct scientific political negotiators. What is needed now, not just using technical and scientific experts to work beside the political negotiators. However, I want to empower environmental expert diplomats and train them to engage in all phases of the negotiations actively. We should move on to build an environmental diplomat career. These diplomat careers should speak with an expert and political voice at once. They should approach any environmental issue with a globalist perception. I know that the globalist now, it's a word that may seem sensitive to some groups. Also these environmental diplomats should for sure protect their state's national interest, yet they should foresee environmental topics as convergent issues that touch the whole universe and affect all nations. And in conclusion, I urge all scholars, practitioners in the field of diplomacy, international relations, political science, and all social sciences and other majors to move beyond the traditional perceptions and understanding of their fields. I urge them to move toward interdisciplinary and intradisciplinary perspectives. And thank you. I hope it's just 10 minutes.
And that's about 10 minutes. Very good.
Thank
Thanks,
you so
thanks,
much.
Leila.
Thank
You
you.
can unshare. We
Okay.
are now going to proceed to Eric Huxthausen. And Eric, if I will share your slides. So hold on a second. If you can go ahead and introduce yourself while I'm sharing. And Eric, you may need to, I think you need to unmute.
Sorry about that. Yeah, nice. Hi, everyone. Nice to be here with you. Paul, thanks for the invitation to present. So my background is basically been between working in government for the United States government and working in the environmental NGO sector with some of the major NGOs. The longest period of time, I spent 5 years as the director of U.S. climate policy at the Nature Conservancy, but we were also very involved in international engagement as well during that time. And my most recent background has been for the last, I guess, more than 10 years, have been working on at the intersection of environment and development. So I spent some time at the U.S. Agency for International Development, and then most recently was a senior advisor to the director of the U.S. Trade and Development Agency, leading the climate change work of that organization. And in those roles, I've had experience in various multilateral fora relating to climate change and other issues. So that includes participating in the conferences of the parties to the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change. We just concluded COP30 in Belém in Brazil just last week or so, a week or two ago, and participated in the meetings of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, which is the organization that releases the global scientific assessments on climate change every several years. In the board meetings of the Green Climate Fund, which is an institution that was set up by the under the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change or through the UN Framework Convention to be a financial instrument for implementing climate action on what's called mitigation, reducing emissions, and on adaptation, and various other kind of international contexts and organizations. And I've also worked on development as well, so supporting the development of projects that will advance climate mitigation or adaptation in developing countries. Um, and we can go to the next slide. So I apologize that my presentations may be a little dry, but I tried to take a kind of high level overview of environmental diplomacy. What is it? And we can kind of get into the details, more of the texture of it in the conversation and the questions that follow. But essentially, and I think Layla covered this. It's countries that collaborating or negotiating to reach agreements or resolve conflicts that address international and or transboundary environmental challenges. And as Layla mentioned, those that can relate to pollution control, as is the case with climate change, or it can relate to conservation of resources, as you have with fisheries, biodiversity, watersheds, water bodies, etc. So sometimes these are global multinational issues like climate change, ozone depletion, ocean conservation, even preserving places that aren't within the national boundaries like Antarctica or even space. And sometimes it relates to resources, environmental resources, or pollution that crosses borders. And you have, many countries share watersheds where you have, a river might flow through several countries, and what the country upstream does affects the country downstream. Many coastal countries have zones out offshore in which their nationals, their citizens are fishing, and sometimes there are waters that many countries might claim or that are international waters, but there's a shared resource outside those that has to be managed or within those shared boundaries. Um, and then you have the issue of waste management. Pollution, plastic pollution, for example, is a very hot topic these days. And then in the context of trade negotiations, um, there are multilateral and also many bilateral trade agreements. You have the issue of harmonization of laws, that one country may have stricter environmental standards than another or different environmental standards. And if they want to trade, how do they ensure that the trade is balanced and respecting the individual national prerogatives in terms of managing their own environmental considerations or interests within um, with their own sovereignty. So we can go to the next slide. So it's just to say that some environmental negotiations take place in a multilateral context with many different countries participating. Others are bilateral with two countries participating. And where does this happen? It happens under the auspices of the United Nations. So in the UN General Assembly, in the UN, in the implementation of various treaties that are administered by UN organizations. So the UN uh, a key moment was in 1992, the Rio in Rio de Janeiro in Brazil. There were three major environmental treaties that were negotiated and agreed there. One is the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change, which is the instrument under which all of the international negotiations on climate change or the major ones take place. Um, and Layla mentioned the Kyoto Protocol. That's an instrument of the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change. The Paris Agreement also is under the UN Framework on Climate Change. Um, we have negotiations in the international scientific bodies in places like the World Meteorological Organization, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change about um, ostensibly these are and really they are scientific bodies, but there's always a little bit of policy that kind of works its way in there, and that has to be negotiated. There are clubs of countries such as the G7, the Group of Seven nations, the G20, which just met in South Africa, the OECD, the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, which is sometimes called the Rich Country Club, the BRICS, which includes a number of middle-income countries, important middle-income countries. And there's various ad hoc convenings that take place as well, and many other clubs as well. And then there's a financial context, so places like the World Bank, the Green Climate Fund will be venues for environmental negotiation um, about raising funds for environmental activity and then how the funds should be spent. And then, as I mentioned, a negotiation of trade agreements. But the bottom line is wherever countries feel like it's useful or advantageous for them to try to negotiate over environmental issues, they will do that. You can go to the next slide. So how does civil society enter into this arena? So there's many types of environmental organizations, non-governmental organizations, or NGOs for short. Some operate at a local scale, focused on protecting a local kind of local environmental, addressing local environmental issues. Many are national in scope, and then there's some, like say the World Wildlife Federation, that are international and but even the international ones, they really, if you look at them closely, they break down into national organizations at the end of the day because that's kind of where the rubber meets the road for environmental issues, is at the national level or below. That's where the practical action will take place. And there are lots of different kinds of organizations and different ways that they engage. Some are focused on policy analysis. They're more technical organizations. They want to disseminate information about environmental issues. Some are focused on advocacy, on changing policy, on influencing policy, whether that's kind of within governmental institutions, sort of working what we call in the U.S. inside the Beltway, focused on interacting directly with the executive branch of the U.S. federal government or the legislative branch, Congress, and their analogs, I would imagine, in every country and at the subnational levels as well. Some are focused on mass mobilization of people to kind of rise up and express themselves, and others are focused on implementation of solutions, and they bring a whole range of different skill sets. Um, and there's other types of organizations that aren't necessarily branded as environmental organizations that are still engaged in influencing environmental diplomacy. And you really see this at the climate conferences of the parties or COPs that take place every year. And that includes think tanks that will present on different views of how policy should be implemented, on solutions, religious organizations, labor movements, businesses and trade associations are very prominent in these settings. Foundations are often supporting the NGOs financially, and they will sometimes show up directly. And then you'll have academics, universities will be there. So there's a real range. And development NGOs particularly have been involved in a lot of implementation as well. Go to the
Um,
next slide.
Eric, you've got about a minute and a half.
Oh, really? It went fast. Okay.
Yep.
All right. So um, I'll just quickly take through this. This kind of relates to some of the points I made earlier. Civil society can inform in a technical way, in an advocacy way, and they are also very important in holding countries accountable. So we can go to the next slide. Um, I mentioned the first point, but also I think another point that's worth discussing is that the influence that civil society can have on environmental issues is really at the end of the day, this always comes back to openness, democracy. And you see this even in the climate COPs where, the Brazil COP that just took place in Belém, it's the first one we've had in a few years that was in a country that's not really an authoritarian country. So, and you saw more activism there than you've seen in the last few years, and that's because it's a more permissive environment for civil society and for activism. So we can talk more about that in the conversation. People are interested. Go to the next slide. So how can you get involved as individuals? How can individuals get involved? First of all, by informing yourself. Secondly, join or affiliate in some way with an organization, whether it's volunteer or member or in a professional capacity. By communicating with officials who are involved in these negotiations or in policymaking, and then by attending events or conferences or even demonstrations on these issues. And then the last slide just has some pictures of different ways of different kind of aspects of civil engagement. So you have everything from the forum up on the top left, a group of indigenous people who are speaking at the COP28 that took place 2 years ago in the UAE. I think this other we have a group, an international group called 350.org in Vietnam making a demonstration of sorts. Marches in the street in Berlin on the bottom left, and then Greta Thunberg, who is instrumental in organizing the school strike for climate, which shows that even young people can have a great influence on changing the atmospherics around environmental diplomacy. Thanks.
Sorry about that. Thanks, Eric. We are proceeding lastly to Segun, who is joining us from Nigeria. Segun, go ahead, and you can share your own slides. And you'll need to unmute. There you go.
Yeah. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Oh, okay. Okay. Thank you, Dr. Paul Echela, for inviting me. I also, it is great to be on this panel with Professor Leila, Nicholas, and Mr. Eric. I think because of time, I would just rush through my slides. And I believe that we would have enough time after my presentation to interact more and then look at the issues in a more detailed manner. My presentation basically is to look at the possibilities for citizen involvement in environmental diplomacy. And then looking at the African context as well. So quickly, by introduction, I think you can start sharing the slides. I think you have the slides already.
Do you want to go ahead and share your slides, or do you want me to do that?
Please go ahead and share the slides.
Okay.
Dr. Paul.
Sure. All right, hold on a second.
Okay, by way of introduction, I would say that environmental challenges actually transcend national boundaries, rendering unilateral action insufficient and often ineffective. And then issues such as climate change, biodiversity loss, pollution, just name them, um, depletion, the resource depletion flow across borders and continents, all these link the destinies of states and societies in unprecedented ways. And this interconnected reality actually underscores the imperative of robust global cooperation. As we all know, no single country, regardless of its capacity, can adequately confront these challenges. alone. That's why meaningful progress demands coordinated international effort, shared responsibilities, and collaborative policy frameworks that harness collective expertise and resources. And I think this is the context for environmental diplomacy. And interestingly, multilateral environmental negotiations have become near constant feature of global governance. And at virtually any moment, government representatives, international organizations, and diverse stakeholders are convening somewhere in the world to deliberate on pressing ecological challenges and, of course, chart pathways for cooperative action. And
Segun, I just want to make sure you tell me when you want me to switch slides. Okay.
oh, I would let you know. I would
Okay.
let you know.
Great.
So major cities have continued to host conferences, technical sessions, and high-level meetings that shape contemporary environmental agendas. And these frequent interactions underscore the dynamism, complexity, and globalized nature of environmental diplomacy in the 21st century. You can move to the next slide. Next, please. Yes, environmental diplomacy has long been dominated by state actors, with an emphasis on formal treaty negotiations, intergovernmental platforms, and high-level bilateral engagement. And in the last 2 decades, however, the governance landscape for addressing transboundary environmental challenges has evolved significantly. What was once a predominantly state-centered arena has now expanded into a dynamic multi-actor field where different actors now participate more visibly and substantively in shaping agendas, monitoring compliance, and driving innovative solutions. And their growing influence underscores a broad shift toward more inclusive, collaborative, and polycentric environmental diplomacy. This next slide, I don't think I need to touch on the conceptual framing. The two previous speakers have already touched on that. We can move to the next one, the next slide. Now, what are the pillars that provide opportunities for citizens to engage or participate in environmental diplomacy? And one of such pillars that we have seen and observed is that environmental governance has actually evolved into a multifaceted regime, multifaceted regime complex that encompasses states, international organizations, subnational authorities, private sector entities, civil society groups. And this expanding architecture actually creates diverse entry points through which citizens can shape policy processes and influence outcomes beyond the formal confines of UN negotiating halls. Next slide. Another important pillar that we have observed is that international processes increasingly now incorporate formal mechanisms for NGO and citizen engagement, and allowing these critical non-state entities to contribute directly to negotiating tests, side events, and official submissions. We must, however, note that access to these venues remains uneven and often shaped by disparities in resources and the influence of entrenched elite networks. Next slide. The third pillar that I would like to touch on is litigation, such as climate-related suits, claims rooted in constitutional environmental rights, alongside market-based pressures, including investor activism and consumer campaigns. All these have emerged as a powerful set of instruments through which citizens and civil society actors can influence and catalyze governmental action. So litigation and market pressures now provide critical opportunities for citizen involvement in environmental diplomacy. Now, what pathways exist for citizens to actually engage or get involved in environmental diplomacy, or if we like, civic environmentalism. And the first one that I have on my slide is, and from what we have also observed, practically speaking, is that transnational advocacy networks, is that of transnational advocacy networks and campaign coalitions. So NGOs and grassroots movements create cross-border coalitions that shape agenda setting and provide and public narratives, and therefore pressuring states prior to and during negotiations, mobilizing expertise and translating local grievances into international claims. And these networks can actually leverage media, produce shallow reports, and then lobby delegates, even at negotiation venues. Another one is citizens can participate as accredited observers and experts, and they have done that so often. Many international fora now allow accredited civil society observers to submit evidence, convene side events, and deliver oral statements. Although such access does not automatically translate into policy influence, it nonetheless opens important avenues for citizen engagement, particularly when leveraged through strategic framing and well-crafted technical contributions. Another important pathway is that of litigation. I mentioned that as one of the pillars, but I'm repeating that as one of the pathways for citizen environmental diplomacy. Now, courts have increasingly emerged as pivotal arenas for climate and environmental governance. Citizens and indigenous communities are relying on domestic and international legal instruments to hold states and corporations accountable, thereby generating jurisprudence that informs public policy and strengthens diplomatic bargaining positions. The growing success of environmental litigation not only clarifies and reframes legal obligations, but also shapes the dynamics of multilateral negotiations by influencing the distribution of responsibilities as well as cost. Another pathway that I would like to touch on is citizen-led climate movement and mass mobilization. So citizen-led movements, particularly climate movement and mass demonstrations, impose significant reputational and electoral cost on governments that fail to act. And such large-scale mobilization reshapes national priorities and by extension influences the country's diplomatic posture. Moreover, the inclusion of youth representatives in particular in national delegations and observer constituencies can help to channel the momentum of public mobilization into formal diplomatic processes. And then finally under that, I would also like to call our attention to the importance of digital diplomacy as an important pathway for civic environmentalism. As we all know, digital platforms now empower citizens to influence international narratives, crowdsource critical data, and rapidly mobilize transnational advocacy networks. We must, however, observe that these opportunities are usually often tempered by persistent digital asymmetries and growing prevalence of disinformation, which together complicate the effectiveness and integrity of such engagement.
Stegun,
Now,
if you could wrap up, just you've got about a minute.
okay, so have I spent 10 minutes?
Yeah, it passes quickly.
Okay, so constraint, when we talk about civic environmentalism, what constraints, what problems, difficulties do citizens often face? We can talk about limited access to information. We know many citizens lack timely, reliable, and comprehensive environmental information. And, complex data, can be inaccessible. Government may underreport or restrict environmental data, and then low digital literacy can widen our information gap. And then weak institutional and legal frameworks. Environmental regulatory policies may lack autonomy. Citizens petitions or public hearings may exist only on paper. Corruption may also undermine procedural justice. Financial and resource constraints could also be a constraint. And maybe I should stop here at this point, and I hope I would have time later on to touch on the African context and the opportunities and the challenges. So let me stop here for now.
Great. Thanks,
Thank you,
Segun.
Paul.
We are going to open up the discussion, and I do encourage you to place your comments and questions in the Zoom chat. Some of you have already been commenting. Abdul, who's joining us from Ghana, has offered some perspective. Terrence, who is joining us from Cameroon, well, actually from the United Emirates, but is from Cameroon, has offered some thoughts here in the Zoom chat. By all means, offer your questions. And by the way, you're all welcome to chime in. Some of you have expertise in this topic or more broadly in diplomacy, and you are welcome to chime in with your own thoughts. It's not just a question and answer period. I do at some point want to get to this kind of interesting, these set of interesting points that a number of that the speakers made about authoritarian regimes, astroturf, activism. Those are kind of interesting topics and challenges for citizen diplomats who are trying to have some sort of an impact on environmental policy. But I want to start with Abdul, who I think is with us. Abdul, do you want to share your thoughts here? Who's joining us from Ghana? If Abdul cannot hear me, I'm not sure if he can hear me. I'll read his comment and then just ask the speakers for their thoughts. Abdul says Ghana is now facing a lot of environmental issues that has to do with illegal mining, leading to the pollution of water bodies and also to um, deformed newborn babies. Now that USAID has closed, the U.S. Agency for International Development, is there another international organization that supports local NGOs in the field of climate change? I don't know. I don't know if you have practical advice for him, given his work locally, but I would love your thoughts on that.
Is that directed to
Any of the speakers, but also
okay.
anybody here who might be able to answer.
Yeah.
Who's filling the void now that USAID is gone for now, at least?
Hmm. I mean, I'm happy to speak to it, but I don't have a good answer. I think, well, first of all, USAID was the largest, but is not the only nationally funded development organization. And so there are others. A number of the European countries have development agencies. They are also, many of them are also receiving a reduction in funding because of the Russia's um, illegal invasion of Ukraine, and so they are now having to divert funding to their own national defense and spend more on defense in order to protect themselves from a potential future Russian invasion of other European countries. Um, but the so there's a real drop in funding available for development, but there are still organizations, there are still agencies that are funding development. There are still the international organizations, international institutions such as the Global Environment Facility, which works on a range of environmental issues, the Green Climate Fund working on climate change, and the climate investment funds at the World Bank, and others as well. And there are some national agencies that are increasing investment. I was told recently that KOICA, the Korean Development Agency is starting to increase funding. Um, so anyway, it's a big bucket to fill, but I expect that there will be other agencies that will, or organizations that are eventually moving into it. But there are fewer resources than there used to be,
Great.
unfortunately.
Eric, Leila or Segun, do you want to chime in on that?
Sorry, I don't have answers about that. It's very specific and
Yeah, yeah. Eric, actually, you offered some kind of helpful organizations that should, I guess, be on people's radar for those who are kind of interested in funding for the for environmental work. If you could just put those in the Zoom chat, that would be great, just for others, people's reference. I'm going to switch to Terrence. Terrence, I don't know if Terrence is still he is with us. Terrence is joining us again from United Arab Emirates, but is from Cameroon. Do you want to share, Terrence, your comment? Or do you have a question?
Hi, Paul. Thank you. Thanks for the presentation. All the presentation was so nice. And I already my colleague have already shared what I had, and I'm following up.
Okay, great. Um, Diego, do you want to share your question?
Do you need to change money?
Yes, Paul, may I?
Yes, and
If I
Diego
may,
is joining us. Diego is joining us from Bolivia.
yeah. This is I'm joining. You might be a little bit surprised because I even wrote here that I am a retiree. I retired from the U.S. Embassy here from the State Department after 24 years of running the Fulbright program in Bolivia. But before that, I have a very long history, and I don't want to toot my own horn by no means, but I was trying to do a lot of stuff with coffee growing, and it's a very long experience. I could talk for hours about that, but it has to do with like family and roots that my dad's family was involved in this country for many years in the production of I want to talk coffee. And through the production of coffee, which Bolivian coffee can be like the best in the world, although has not been promoted that way yet, and has not acquired that quality yet. But anyway, through the production of coffee, my idea was to really try and protect the environment, and especially those areas in Bolivia, and not just Bolivia, but many other parts of the world where coffee is produced. But at the same time, you can really protect the environment. Coffee is an incredible plant that also fosters the conservation of the rainforest, high altitude rainforest, et cetera, et cetera. So I try to do that. I reached out to some people at the time. USAID was working in Bolivia, and we worked with them even before I joined the U.S. Embassy that I did, like I said, for 24 years. But even before that, we were working with USAID trying to do projects that would really be an example for the world in terms of production of coffee, but also conservation of the rainforest, especially high altitude rainforest. And I think there's so much to be done in that realm, especially and one of the last projects that I saw that it was being done in Costa Rica was that with the intervention of people, of citizens from European countries and Americans also from the U.S. They were able to contribute. There were projects being done that they would contribute with money to the conservation of the rainforest and the production of really high quality coffee. Those are the sort of things that really I would love to go back to that and start doing that again. Basically, in a nutshell, that's what I can say, that it'd be wonderful to engage people so that we can really go to the bottom of things, grassroots activities, and that'd be wonderful.
Mhm. Great. Uh, Eric or Leila, I think we may have lost Segun because I don't see him on our screen here. But do you guys want to react on coffee? It sounds like coffee, to the extent that it's an international phenomenon. It certainly is traded internationally, and it has some environmental consequences. But that's fairly specific, so totally understand if you don't want to delve into that.
I have a comment about that because we should understand that sometimes economic reasons may urge or let the state does not abide by the environmental standards. So the states has to weigh and balance between economic incentives, environmental issues, and the growth of the society in general. So when the society is in poverty or there are jobless people, you cannot just say, okay, let's go for limiting these opportunities, economic opportunities, just for the environment. I understand that from not from a liberal or like. I know that we should preserve the environment for the future generations, but we should understand also the needs of these generations also.
Mhm. Eric, any thoughts?
No, except I would agree that, and thanks for the work you've done, Diego. I'd agree that coffee and tropical forest conservation coffee is just like one piece of that whole nexus of issues, but it's a huge one. I mean, something that's happening globally right now is that in many countries, well, in the Amazon particularly, notably, the tropical forests have been what they call a sink for carbon dioxide. Carbon dioxide is the major greenhouse gas that absorbs essentially absorbs energy and makes the earth warmer. That's the mechanism for climate change. And and that's changing now as the climate warms, the forests are drying out in some places, including in the Amazon, and that's causing it to lose its ability to absorb carbon dioxide. So, but there are many products of tropical forests, and coffee is coffee is a it's one of many agricultural products that are going to be adversely affected by climate change.
Mm. I mean, this does, I guess, get back to Segun's kind of interesting point about one of the points of leverage that citizen diplomats have is through economic activity, and to the extent that they can coordinate their activity, they can create kind of supportive networks for particular sustainable coffee growing. I guess that's not only environmentally sustainable, but supportive of the community of growers, as opposed to the corporations that may be kind of trading the coffee. So yeah, good points. We have Debbie Trent, who is joining us, I think, from the United States, somewhere in the U.S. Who I would love for her to kind of introduce herself a little more fully, because she's doing actual environmental work in and we have a little bit of an echo, so apologies while she's speaking, but
Is it still there?
yeah, it's still there, but don't but bear with
Mm,
it. I think it's fine. We can still
apologies.
hear you. Um, but Debbie does environmental work and has started an NGO doing environmental work in Lebanon. So Debbie, if you could explain a bit, and
Sure.
then
Well,
to the extent, yeah.
we've taken a village a village to nonprofit partnership approach um, in our work. The nonprofit is called Illumi Dash Nation Global Inc. As I put in the chat, and in Lebanon, there are many aspects of our work that resonate with some of the topics that have come up today. We're dealing with a very, very weak government, a very fragile situation. I mean, it's at its lowest point that it's been in decades, and it was never a strong government. And so, in trying to engage with through the good works of a philanthropist who started a foundation, he in Switzerland to promote a fuel cell, an oxide fuel cell solution to producing generating solar fueled electricity at the village level to the national and even the regional and global level. Would require bilateral agreement between Switzerland, where his foundation is established, and Lebanon, and so ministerial approvals and a bilateral agreement have to be achieved, and we've just gone nowhere in 5 years with that. It's been very frustrating, despite all kinds of connections, political connections and otherwise. So we turned to our village partners, one in the south of the country and one in the sort of north central east of the country, and their mayors, who are very entrepreneurial, as mayors have to be in a small country with a weak central government. And what are some of the other environmentally sustainable projects that we can do that don't cost as much and don't require central government permissions? And so we've come up with a few, and now there are some foundations in and around Lebanon and in the region that we're going with. So all I need is like one grant, 6-figure grant, and then I can demonstrate. We can demonstrate that to private individual donors that we can be a good investment for them if they want to make a potentially tax deductible donation to our nonprofit to get some of these projects going that involve in some one way or another environmental climate warming mitigation. One is a wildfire prevention, civil defense center, and another is a street lighting project, and another is a guest house, a small guest house for sort of ecotourism purposes, and it would have a little marketplace area where local artisanal products could be sold. So we're having to pivot often and shift priorities, but we still have in mind the bigger project when the government changes and reformers hold sway in Lebanon, and hopefully this will click with help from international NGOs. So it's just looking in all different areas, all different levels of international governance to get this done. Just not giving up.
Yep.
That's my little story.
Yeah, I know, but and God bless you for your persistence on this. I'm going to mute you just so that we don't have the echo. But uh, so this again comes back to kind of it sounds like in situations where, I mean, we have problems with authoritarian countries essentially stifling, as Eric pointed out, environmental activism. But then we also have cases like Lebanon where we have weak states, and there The problem is it's just you're not able to maneuver effectively or get the permissions, and you have to kind of go at a more subnational level to try to exercise to make some progress. Um, any thoughts on that, Layla? Layla, particularly since you come from Lebanon, it would be great to get your thoughts, but Eric as well. Layla?
Um, I don't know what's the projects and why are getting 5 years to get approvals, but I think that the way getting involved with the municipalities, I think will be a good idea. They can accept funds. They can collaborate with the local initiatives. I think the best way is to go to the municipalities.
Okay, great. And Eric, any thoughts on that before we go on to somebody else, Keen Ann?
No, just to say, I mean, that's a like I'd say two thoughts on what Debbie said. One is that you highlighted the role of philanthropists in funding local projects, which is an important one, but also the role of the difficulty in actually moving from good ideas to implementation, which can be stymied by various things, often a lack of funding, but also bureaucracy can be really challenging in many countries. So even for those who have money and want to give it away and deploy it for useful things, and that includes governments as well. Say, for example, at the agency that I worked for, the U.S. Trade and Development Agency, it's not uncommon that we might have a conceptual agreement to provide a grant to a project in another country, but it could take years for the government to approve it, and that's even with the weight of U.S. diplomats trying to press for the project to be approved, and the country itself having lots of stakeholders who want it. So I think bureaucracy can be a real challenge in many countries.
Diego, if you can share your comment to the Zoom chat rather than because I'd like to just get to these two other questions that we have here. Um, Keen Ann, I don't know if you can hear us, but if you can actually tell us where you're coming from and then just pose your question. Keen Ann may not hear us or may not be present. So, Eric, it's a question to you. And I'm not sure if why it's leveled at you, perhaps because you live in the United States and you once were representing a U.S. Agency. But what do you think about the environmental destruction in Gaza? I got this is a rhetorical question. There's clearly a leaning question, I imagine. And in South Lebanon, uprooting olive trees by Israel and how government's helping with preventing that. If you can frame that within kind of environmental diplomacy, I'd appreciate it, Eric.
Yeah, I mean, I would just say, well, first of all, I'm not working for the U.S. government now, so whatever I say is my personal capacity. I'm not speaking for the U.S. government, um, but I would just say that obviously the environmental destruction is unfortunate. I'm aware. I mean, I think what's gone on in Gaza, the you mentioned olive trees, but that seems to be by far the least of the destruction. That's not to dismiss that because it's really important. In fact, um, in the past, the U.S. Agency for National Development funded quite a lot of development work in Gaza and the West Bank, and in Lebanon. And has been involved in environmental issues such as water. There's a shared water resource as well in that region that affects requires cooperation between Israel and West Bank, Gaza, Jordan, other countries. So yeah, the environmental. I think when you have war, the environmental issues tend to fall down to the side, or they're lower in people's perception of what's going on because you have so much loss of human life and just destruction of human livelihoods, houses, etc. But when you go then to rebuild, which hopefully can happen soon, then then you're sort of faced with the fact that as you say, you don't have the olive trees, you don't have these productive resources that make it easier to sustain you know life and quality of life in a particular place. So it's often the case that you have environmental destruction in a context where you have essentially warfare going on, and when that happens, there's a long-term loss there that's very hard to rebuild.
Yeah, and I guess it should be noted that there are long-term consequences. I mean, you can understand wars as environmental disasters, and then with environmental disasters with kind of long-term consequences, it'll be interesting to see, unfortunately, what happens in Gaza, in part because there are probably unexploded bombs and all kinds of hazardous materials that have to be removed before they can even redevelop Gaza. So clearly kind of war is extraordinarily destructive, and probably not just destructive for the environment, but clearly for it seems for civil society. Um, uh, I wanted to go to I believe it's Emily. Emily, do you want to speak your question about kind of a north-south, global north and global south?
Sure, happy to do that. Can you all hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. Yeah, so just for context, I work for a human rights and climate justice NGO. Um, and one of the challenges that we encounter a lot is that the majority of the pollution is done by countries in the global north, which tend to be more industrialized, such as the US, the EU, the UK. But then the negative effects of climate change and this pollution tend to fall on the global south, such as Africa, the Middle East, and parts of Asia. And oftentimes these countries have fewer resources and ability to come back from the challenges of extreme weather and different climate disasters and pollution. So I was curious what diplomatic solutions there might be to resolve this equitably, and what incentives global north countries might have as part of this process to make things more equitable.
Layla, because I think unfortunately Segun is not with us. Layla, do you want to go ahead first?
Yes, I think that they can abide by the concept of the polluter pays, so they can pay for development projects in the global south. So at least they can weigh the consequences and the effect of the pollution they have affected the globe. This is the only way. So if I don't think that you can ask them that to stop polluting, they will keep polluting, but at least they pay for development projects, and this will help the alleviate some of the poverty in the global south.
Eric?
Yeah, I would say, I mean, climate change is the case that comes. I think it's the sort of canonical case here, but and I think when the international negotiations on climate change started in the late 80s or early 1990s, it was definitely the case, as you say, that the global north was responsible for the lion's share of the pollution, and it was the global south that was bearing the consequences. And it's still the case that the global south is the most vulnerable, just because of lack of resources or capacity. But it's increasingly the case that countries in the global south, if you will, are contributing a greater amount to current pollution. In the case of climate change, the carbon dioxide from 100 years ago is still about half of that is still up in the atmosphere, and so there's a legacy of pollution. So even if we stopped our emissions today in the United States, we would be still responsible for a significant share of the historical pollution. But if you look at the sort of the greenhouse gases going into the atmosphere every year, right now the largest polluter by far is China, and I don't have the exact numbers at hand, but they're emitting probably 50% more, or even more than that, than the United States. So they're by far, I think they're like 20%, 25, 20, more than 20% now of the global emissions. And there are many middle income countries that are growing their economies very rapidly and burning a lot of coal. India is one, but then also some of the Southeast Asian countries are starting to increase. So I think in emissions, so that's a problem. Also, if you look at plastic pollution, that's comes predominantly from a lot of countries in Asia. So in terms of plastic pollution going into the oceans, so it's really it's a global problem, and each issue has its own kind of texture and reality. And I think as Layla suggested, you have international negotiations where different parties take on different aspects of the problem as something that they can hopefully is something that they can contribute to, and whether it's financially through as Layla mentioned, through development. That was basically the approach that the U.S. had taken up until this year, when the U.S. aid was essentially demolished in a way that's, I'll just say, completely illegal and contrary to the constitutional norms and structure of the way the government is supposed to operate in the United States. Um, but uh, but that's one way to tackle it. Essentially, is through financial contributions or development assistance.
I wanted to get to go back to something that Layla said in her presentation about developing kind of diplomatic experts on the environment. And Layla, I think you probably framed that in terms of governments identifying environmental experts and recruiting those experts to inform the policy discussions, as I understand it. Um, there is, from my understanding, and check me if I'm wrong on this, Debbie, you might be able to chime in on this. There's some movement in the United States, well, at least under the Biden administration, to develop subnational diplomacy. There was, I believe, an agency within the State Department intended to develop that. And there have been some discussions, I think, in Congress about kind of mobilizing certain civil society actors, including scientists, to leverage them as whether in official capacities as government representatives or as just civil society representatives. And so I'm wondering if you can speak more to that, particularly, I guess, the relationship between government and civil society in this case, in the development of expertise and the mobilization of expertise, I guess, for both of you, but Layla first, and then anybody else who wants to chime in.
Yes, I'm not just when I seek for expert diplomats, not just for the governments. Sometimes the governments lack this expertise, then they go to the civil society, and then they get the help from the civil society. That's why the civil society should be aware of this, should provide the states this expertise, and most of the negotiations are trilateral. That the firms, the civil society, and the states go and they all negotiate. So when the civil society had the expertise, either in the environment, the science, or even the diplomatic expertise, then they can implement their agenda, and then the states will. If they have weak negotiators, then the civil society can implement its own agenda on these weak negotiators. That's why all of them, both of them, because the firms are are out of this because they seek for just for profit, but the civil society and the states seek for public good, and then they should be able to promote their negotiators, promote their experts who sit on the negotiating tables by this expertise.
Mm, Eric? And then Debbie, it sounds like you want to chime in. So Eric.
There's nothing more important about diplomacy, whether it's citizen, public, bilateral, whatever it is, than keying in on mutual interests. And research scientists are doing all kinds of great work on the environment wherever they can get the funding. Sometimes they just use their own salaries and resources, and graduate students, undergrads. And we know, Diego knows, Paul and I know others that the Fulbright program and other countries' international scholarship and fellowship programs are what's keeping us going. When there were really bad times in Egypt, and relations with the United States were almost officially non-existent. It was the scholars that and their research institutes that kept the channels open, kept the research going, kept the science emerging. Um, that's what we have to depend on more and more now. So any way that we as citizens can get in there and facilitate and piggyback on those kinds of projects, the better. From coffee to solar to and just individual entrepreneurs and small businesses and larger businesses.
Mhm. Thanks, Debbie. And if you could mute yourself, yeah, perfect for avoiding the echo. But uh, Eric, I'm also reminded of what you said in your profile, which we're going to share in just a moment before you comment. Um, uh, but the with the CDI bulletin, that Americans remain kind of largely not particularly aware of the kind of massive imprint we have on the world environmentally and otherwise, um, and uh, and in some cases are just misinformed or disinformed, deliberately disinformed. And so I'm wondering, kind of getting back to this mobilization of expertise. It seems to be, and here's what I guess what I'm suggesting is that perhaps the mobilization of expertise can also leverage kind of mobilization of the broader public in some sense for some sort of creation in countries with open societies where governments are kind of welcoming of civil society input. Of course, that the experts aren't going to be enough, right? And so how do we get the public, because you can have all kinds of expertise, but if the public's not on board, then the politicians typically tend not to be on board.
Yeah, this has been kind of a grand strategy in climate change dating back to the early days in the late 80s, early 90s when this started to become an issue that was clearly on the policy agenda. And one of the things that was done was to establish the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, which could provide a scientific input to the international negotiation process. And it's been quite successful, I would argue, at doing that. It puts out these global assessment reports every 5 to 7 years or so. There have been six so far, and then there are sometimes reports intervening between the global assessments. So I was involved in in the report on 1.5 degrees of warming that came out in 2018, and a report on climate change and land in 2019. But those reports have become rallying points for civil society, for NGOs, environmental NGOs, to use as a basis for, engaging the public. There's usually, whenever those come out, there's a huge, you know, um, a bunch of media attention on it, and a lot of articles and so forth. So they really spawn a lot of writing about climate change, and they tend to seep into the public consciousness that way through all the media attention that they garner. So that's been part of the process. Clearly not perfect, because we still have in the U.S. 40% of the people seem to have of the public seem to have doubt about climate change being real, or is it caused by people? But other countries don't have that issue to the same extent. I mean, that's largely because of funding by the fossil fuel industry and auto industry and others over a period of decades to deliberately sow misinformation. Um, I, there are a couple other points that that you raised in your question, Paul. One was on subnational engagement, and I really think that comes from the subnational. There was during the first Trump administration in the United States, there was an effort that was funded by Michael Bloomberg or his foundation, and run out of the World Wildlife of WWF, World Wildlife Federation,
Federation, I think.
and called "We Are All In," basically a way of rallying the subnational governments in the United States and businesses that wanted to show their flag in support of climate action, to say, maybe the U.S. national government is going backwards on this issue, but there are lots of institutions and states in the U.S. that are going forward. And that's still the case, that's still operating now. You had a little bit of that in Brazil just this last month, but I think, I would say that the movement is kind of back on its heels a little bit in the US right now, but I expect that will shift sooner, within the next year or two. And then lastly, I just wanted to comment on Layla's point about technical training of diplomats. I think that's really important. That was actually something that in the United States, we actually there was an effort to improve the technical training of diplomats at the State Department, because often you'll have people who are very good diplomats, but they don't have the technical knowledge. Or sometimes they even have some technical knowledge, but they don't have practical knowledge. And you see this in the treaty negotiations, because you'll have lots of these high-flying ideas, these very brilliant, conceptual, idealistic ideas, and people negotiate over them. But then it's the people who are negotiating aren't necessarily the ones who know what it takes to get things done on the ground. And so even though you have business come in and can be a negative force in the sense of pressure, kind of counseling delay, it can also be a positive force in the sense that they have resources and they know how to get things done. So they're trade-offs.
Great. Eric, thanks. And Layla, thanks for your presentations. Thanks to all of you for a rich discussion. We need to finish off by presenting the last CDI bulletin of the year. I'm going to share my screen, and Maria, who's been my co-editor this year, is going to present that to you. So you just now have her on screen with that beautiful wintry background. Go ahead, Maria.
Hello, everyone. Another great conversation today. So thank you for everyone for participating. Just some few notes here on the bulletin. The first is the United Nations Environmental Assembly meeting that's taking place next week already. It will be taking place in Nairobi, Kenya. And the theme being advancing sustainable solutions for a resilient planet. There will be a variety of different events, including a multi-stakeholder dialogue focused on how to address environmental challenges. So at the bottom of the page, there is a link for more information about that meeting. Also, there are some other discussions taking place. The World Youth Forum is taking place in February in Porto, Portugal. Again, focused on sustainable development, youth entrepreneurship, and innovation. You have the World Economic Forum taking place next month. And the Global Ties meeting also taking place in February in Washington, D.C. There is the annual World Sustainable Development Summit that is taking place in February in New Delhi, India. Again, there's links at the bottom of all of these paragraphs for more information. And then finally, sort of moving on to, there are obviously a lot of articles on a range of different issues related to civil society and civil diplomacy, citizen diplomacy. I would just point out the last book on the page, which is specifically focused on challenges in environmental communication. Folks want to take a look at that. And then, of course, the profiles of our speakers are also included on the last several pages. Thank you.
Great, Maria. So Maria, who does not want to be, she's a private person, and I does not want to be included. I feel bad because she should be on all of these, listed on the first page on all of these issues, because she, for the last year, has been primarily responsible for putting these together. So I really appreciate her doing this. And she, by the way, is a retired Foreign Service officer, so with the U.S. State Department. So really appreciate her expertise in doing this, and her work this year. Thank you again. We are going to be sharing the video of this as well as your slides. So Layla, for all those slides you were quickly went through, we'll be able to share it to a much broader audience. And we will have next year another 4 meetings. There will be an announcement of what the topics will be for next year, but one of them is, I believe, is on kind of literature and diplomacy, children's literature and diplomacy and citizen diplomacy, among other things. Thank you all for your time. Dr. Rahman, who's joining us from Bangladesh, thank you for I think, staying up for quite late. And Diego from Bolivia, and I think Toby, I think you're in the US, but from Nigeria. Much appreciate you guys joining. Keenan from Lebanon, and those from you from the US, and so on. Thanks again, and see you hopefully next year. Bye, everybody.
Bye bye.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.